Let's jump right into today's explainer, where we're breaking down a seriously fascinating conversation. Perplexity AI CEO Aravind Srinivas recently sat down with Lex Fridman, and together they unpacked the foundational philosophies of Google founders Larry Page and Sergey Brin. But here's why this really matters to us right now. We're going to see how the exact blueprint they used to build Google back in the day is actively being used to build the massive AI tools we rely on today. To kick things off, you gotta ask yourself a fundamental question. What actually makes a tech product truly genius? I mean, how did two Stanford PhDs manage to completely dismantle the established internet giants of the early web and create a blueprint for product dominance that people are still fiercely copying decades later? It definitely wasn't luck, and it wasn't just, a slightly tweaked algorithm. The secret sauce really comes down to a core realization Aravind shared with Lex. He said, they didn't compete with the other search engines by doing the same thing. They flipped it. And that right there is the whole ballgame. Google didn't win by simply playing the existing game 10% better than everyone else. They won through absolute contrarian innovation. They looked at the board and just decided to play a completely different game entirely. So let's dive into Pillar 1, contrarian innovation, or as we like to call it, flipping the search table. Think back to the early internet boom. At the time, traditional search engines relied heavily on text-based similarity and early information extraction models, which, let's be honest, just weren't working very well. But Google? They completely ignored the industry standard. Since Larry and Sergey had deep academic roots at Stanford, they decided to look at the actual link structure of the web. They started treating web links just like academic citations, figuring that a highly cited paper, or, a highly linked website, carried a massive signal of quality and authority. And that insight led to the absolute genius of PageRank. It's an algorithm that evaluates the quality and the quantity of links pointing to a web page to determine a relative score of that page's importance. Sergey Brin actually managed to reduce this massive problem down to power iteration, which was basically technological magic back then. It completely flipped the table on how relevance was calculated, moving the entire industry away from dumb text matches to true authoritative ranking. But here's the thing. Their contrarian approach wasn't just limited to writing code. When the dot-com bust hit, everyone panicked. Competitors were frantically trying to build traditional business and marketing divisions to survive. But Larry Page? He saw the internet bust as an incredible arbitrage opportunity. So instead of hiring marketers, he scooped up brilliant, suddenly affordable PhDs, people like the legendary Jeff Dean, to just put their heads down and build robust, deeply grounded core infrastructure. Moving right along to Pillar 2, the latency obsession. In the tech world, this is essentially the superpower of speed. Now, to really grasp the sheer depth of this obsession, you have to look at the launch of Chrome. Larry Page would intentionally test the browser on incredibly old, beat-up Windows laptops. Naturally, his engineers would complain, saying, well, obviously the latency is bad, you're testing it on a terrible machine. But Larry's logic was totally bulletproof. He knew that if he could force his team to make Chrome work flawlessly on absolute garbage hardware with terrible internet, it was going to absolutely fly on a high-end machine. The crucial point here is that when you're obsessing over speed, every single microscopic detail matters. We aren't just talking about server response times. We're talking about having the cursor ready in the search bar immediately, so you don't even have to click. It means auto-scrolling to the bottom of answers. On your phone, it literally means obsessing over the exact millisecond the mobile keypad pops up when you touch the screen. Every single fraction of a second is violently optimized. And all of that obsessive effort brings us to the ultimate, holy grail metric, 0. Why 0? Because when latency is pushed down that far, the number of times a user gets frustrated drops to 0. Aravind explained to Lex that when you hit this point, there's a literal phase shift in the user experience. The product magically transforms from being just a helpful tool into something incredibly addicting, simply because there is 0 friction between your thought and the system's response. You can see how this philosophy directly influences modern AI founders today. Arind told Lex how he mirrors Larry Page's exact strategy by intentionally testing his own AI app, Perplexity, while he's on terrible airplane Wi-Fi. He actively benchmarks its speed against heavyweights like ChatGPT or Gemini from 30,000 feet in the air, knowing full well that if he can deliver a lightning-fast experience on a spotty flight connection, the latency is truly dialed in. Which brings us perfectly to Pillar 3, the user is never wrong, or to put it another way, designing for the lazy. The guiding philosophy for this pillar is incredibly simple. Whatever the user types, you're always supposed to give high-quality answers. This means you never ever blame the user for a bad prompt, a glaring typo, or a poorly constructed query. Arvind actually brought up his own mother using Perplexity. She's definitely not a power user and sometimes types in broken sentences. But his whole mindset is that it's never her fault if she gets a bad result. The product simply must do the magic behind the scenes to understand her true intent. There's a legendary story that illustrates this perfectly. It was an early demo to the CEO of a rival search engine called Excite. Both Google and Excite were given the exact same super broad query, the word university. Google effortlessly pulled up top-tier results like Stanford and Michigan because it inherently understood user intent. Excite? It returned totally random, arbitrary universities, and Excite's CEO literally blamed the user. He argued that if they had just typed a more specific query, it would have worked fine. Google knew right then and there that blaming the user was a total losing strategy. So what creates the real magic of a product? A truly magical product accommodates your typos gracefully. It understands poor speech transcription without breaking a sweat. Ultimately, it allows you, the user, to be completely lazy. It does all the heavy lifting behind the curtain. Think about it. A better product shouldn't force you to work harder. It should empower you to be lazier. All right, let's wrap this all up in our conclusion and look at the actual lessons for modern AI. We really have to pause and ask ourselves, how do these exact principles, contrarian innovation, this wild latency obsession, and the golden rule that the user is never wrong, translate into the way we build and interact with these massive AI chatbots today? Well, a direct application of the user is never wrong is Arvind's firm belief that relying on people to be good prompt engineers is just not a viable long-term strategy. Actually, forcing everyday people to become experts in crafting the perfect sentence just to extract value out of an AI, that's a huge design flaw. The AI needs to be smart enough to figure out what you mean from a messy, poorly constructed query without ever demanding that you ask it perfectly. Aravind hits the nail on the head when he notes that human curiosity is naturally unbounded. But let's face it, we often really struggle to articulate that curiosity into a refined question. Because of this, modern tools have to minimize the time to ask. They do this by borrowing Google's classic people also ask suggestions, baking in auto-suggest search bars, and predicting what you want before you even finish typing. The ultimate goal is to entirely remove the friction between your raw curiosity and the answer you're looking for. We even see this whole philosophy deeply embedded in UI design. Think back to early Google. It was famously just a simple logo and a blank search bar. Nothing else. Today, Perplexity AI is aiming for that exact same ultra-minimalist, clutter-free aesthetic. Aravind pointed out to Lex that power users are constantly asking to have sidebars auto-hidden to reduce visual noise even further. While there's always a debate on how to balance features for new users versus power users, the guiding light is to always keep it as simple as humanly possible. So as we look closely at the software we use every single day and the platforms currently being built to shape our future, we're left with one really critical question. Are your tools forcing you to do the work, or are they silently doing the magic behind the scenes? Thanks so much for walking through this explainer with me. Keep expecting your technology to do the heavy lifting, and never stop being endlessly curious.